Outsiders issue 4, Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing, with Robert Carey on the art. So this is a super interesting issue. I think this book has been very good about doing very distinct single issues, where obviously you've got the running threads of the characters that were involved, but I mean, we go through half this issue before we even see them or hear from them. It tells the story of this woman who was born at the stroke of the millennium, right? So, New Year's Day, 2000, which is actually kind of hurting me now that someone born in that day is now 24.
Yep.
I'm like, crap. They're an adult. Like, that's wild.
They're finishing college.
Basically, tells a story of this specific meta power that this woman has. This is it Jenny was her name?
Jenny, yep.
Who realizes as she's growing up that she has this meta ability, and it's basically she gets very anxious, she gets very nervous, her emotions get heightened, and it really affects her. But as she's growing up, she notices that when she does get really happy, something good happens in the world. The big example a few pages in is that when she goes to her first house party and she thinks she falls for someone, the next day the stock market is like at an all-time high. Like things are going well, things are great. But then a week later, she sees the boy kissing someone else, and the day after that, the entire market crashes. So the idea is that these world events, there's like earthquakes and riots when she's feeling bad, but when she's feeling good things are happening. But it puts a lot of pressure on her, and it means that she has to be very, very scared of feeling anything because it could lead to a lot of bad things. So she kind of develops this life of being in solitude, of not interacting with anyone, and just kind of trying to just, meditate and be away from people.
She becomes this wanderer that needs to keep a constant baseline because she can't get too excited or too sad or anxious. And it leads to this very lonely life.
Yeah. And then she ends up, present day, going to London, and ends up falling for a girl at a party or at a concert or whatever. And they have a great time together. And again, the world benefits from this. Nothing wrong is going on. It's the best couple of days the world's ever had because she's completely in love. But then she gets to basically, dumped or, texted, hey, this was a one night stand. It was fun, but yeah, that's us now. And she breaks down, and of course, lots of bad things start happening. And it's represented in the art with these red, rage lines coming from her head. So it's very visual.
Yeah, it also it reminds me of the Omega Sanction with the way that the Omega Sanction from Darkseid is very red, but there's also these hot whites that go through it as well. Like you just get the feeling that it's a lot of energy packed into those. So very, very effective.
So finally, it comes to our characters. We get, Luke, Kate, and Drummer. And Drummer's filling them in that this girl exists and that she's been in these different locations. I don't think the implication is that all of the text before was Drummer given this speech, because there's stuff there she couldn't possibly know. No,
it was coming from the Authority book, right, or the Planetary book, because a lot of those narration boxes look like they're from pages.
And they also keep going after this when it feels like the speech has ended. So it's not just what she's saying to them, but they're on the way to London, and Drummer's like, yeah, we have to take this girl down. She's too much of a threat. But what actually ends up happening after she runs away from the two back characters is that she runs into Drummer, and there's a good sequence here. There's a whole chase through the subway in London.
And she loses Kate, where Kate is like, she can't lose me. I'm a bat. Like, this is her thing.
And it's a very pretty sequence. I think the art does a really good job of capturing kind of this tranquility of the tunnels and the eeriness of it. But she runs into Drummer outside, and Drummer just actually tries talking to her and saying, hey, I know what your powers are. You're a century baby, right? And there's multiple century babies, and you specifically affect the world. And basically talks about how this is terrible and how it's, you have to control everything. It says you get dealt a bad hand, but whatever. But says something like, oh, you were always my favorite, and she's like, huh? excuse me,
Yeah.
what do you mean I was always your favorite? You know me? And it's like, no, but I like kind of. I knew your predecessor. I knew other Century babies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, so basically tells about all this stuff. Talks about the last one, Jenny Sparks. She was unstoppable. Before her, there was Jenny Discovery. Before her, there was Jenny Crusade. There was a Jenny Quantum.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it's interesting because she's basically giving her advice and saying she has to let her control it. You're not supposed to like just live through it. You're supposed to control it and use it for good. And her powers kick in once again. And she does a whole big full page spread moment where she's like, "My name is Jenny Crisis. You can f
Mm-hmm.
off." um,
Mm-hmm.
so basically, you get to a point here halfway through this conversation where I was like, "Okay, this feels like we're recruiting her for the team as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
anything else." And she actually says, "I'm not joining your silly little team," but
Yeah.
Luke Fox is like, "Hey," because by this point, him and Kate have shown up, and
Right.
he's like, "Hey, okay, but how about we exchange some contact details just in case, we can help each other in the future." So it definitely feels that we're setting up a character who's going to pop back up again.
Mm-hmm.
And Drummer even says the line, "She's not a threat, she's an outsider," which it's very interesting. It's a really interesting character dynamic. You did a little bit of research.
Yeah.
Are all these previous versions that are mentioned
Yeah.
in the other
So
books?
something that I believe was Warren Ellis in the first Authority series introduced the concept of century babies, where every century there'd be one baby born that kind of takes on the personality of what that century would be. So that's where they talk
Hmm.
about Jenny Discovery, right? So in the Authority, it was Jenny Sparks, who was meant to represent the 20th century, and Jenny Sparks gave way to Jenny Quantum, who's the new century baby that's born around seemingly at the same time or around the same time as Jenny Crisis, and or maybe because of the quantum name, I couldn't get a full, just in my cursory thing when that happened, but I do know the two that are mentioned there. Sparks and Quantum were both part of the Authority teams at different times. Um, but these century babies end up having a lot to do with the course of history and how they, not how they change things, but like Jenny Sparks, from my research, had a hand in a lot of big events that happened. So they essentially get to this age around 24, 25, and then stop aging, right? So they always look like a younger
Oh, okay.
person.
So that's how they last all century then.
Yep, right. So, and Jenny Sparks was this, kind of firebrand type character that had a lot to do with these big world events of the 20th century. And so here, what I like that Kelly and Lansing did is they introduced this 21st century, right, century baby and this millennium baby to it's almost like being born at the start of the millennium is almost like supercharging her, right? And because this first 24 years of this century have been so tumultuous, right? Like she is born on Y2K as that stuff is happening. It's really tied to her mental state in just the name Jenny Crisis. It's been one crisis after another,
Which is
that we've had to
also
live through.
it's also very DC as well. Um,
Well, that's true too. And the red energy, like don't
yeah.
get lost in that.
I
So,
also think there's something to be said here about the current century baby having to live this solitude life because they might like cause too much damage. How that
mm-hmm,
kind of relates to the pandemic a little bit,
mm-hmm.
like it's a little COVID-y in a
Yeah.
sense.
Well, there's that, and there's this whole sense of anxiety that our generation, right? Like we're a little bit older than what this girl's supposed to be, but she's very, very much representative. And I believe Kelly and Lansing are both around our age, right? Is that we've had to go through one thing after another, and we just have to keep a stiff upper lip. And that's what she's had to do, right? It's one thing after another, and the only way to get through it is to kind of remove yourself from it and not be a part of it. And I like that Drummer, tells her, well, you don't have to do that. You just got to learn how to control it, you know? And, that's not just because an outsider, that's someone from the outside, trying to comment on it. Like, well, yeah, you can't just step outside. You can't just control it. There's more to this. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of good social commentary through this issue. And just from what I know too, from the coworker that we talked this week about Planetary, the Century Babies have a lot to do in Planetary as well. So this almost being a tie to, Wildstorm in and of itself, and using that to comment on not only superheroes but social commentary of the now, it is very much what that book was about. So having Drummer in here as that tie to kind of bring it from the late 90s to now is super smart.
Yeah, but also it's worth mentioning that this was a very easy to read,
Yes.
full story from beginning to end. It never felt like it penalized anyone for not having knowledge of multiple previous comic book runs.
And in fact, going through the wiki articles and all these different articles on, that I had Googled, they do almost a better job of summing up the Century Baby concept in this issue than, these other, articles in encyclopedia entries do. So, kudos to them. And just the art throughout this issue as well. It is a lady running through, essentially running from her problems, right? But there's a sense of tension throughout it, right? Like when she is running from Batwing and Batwoman, there is a sense of urgency there that they need to get to her.
Yeah, the art's very good. Like all the stuff with her sitting in the rain with Drummer. The big full page spread of her looks very good, very detailed, a lot of emotion and expression on her face. I think even something as simple as the top half of the page where Batwing and Batwoman are walking towards her, she's petting the cat. Yeah. And it's got the right amount of street light and the colouring and the moodiness of it to give it a real sense of atmosphere. And it's kind of emphasized when you go into the close-up panel look, and he's got the sort of the harsh, bright light of the street light behind him, which is, it kind of emphasizes like the location in the scene based on the previous panel. So everything's got a good sense of that. And I think overall, I think this was just a really solid story that introduced me to a concept that I wasn't familiar with. And I think, like I say, it works very well for someone who has no knowledge of Planetary or Authority. I think it's working completely on its own as a weird tales of like different, just oddball things that are going on that feel, slightly connected in that Drummer's got this book that's kind of like telling her about a lot of these things. But it's obviously there's little teases and like references and hints to things for people who do know those books, but is very much working and introducing all of its concepts at a very nice pace for someone new. And if it does become more connected to those prior runs sometime down the line, by that point I'll be too invested for it to take me out of it. It'll be sort of like, okay, now I'm too intrigued by everything they've set up in this book so far. So, but four issues in, I think this is one of the more interesting and honestly kind of nice surprises that DC have had in a while. I wasn't expecting to be enjoying it as much as I am, especially since Lanzing and Kelly, like, they tend to be these fill-in writers that I don't really think much of. I remember them doing some fill-ins in Green Arrow that I thought were just mediocre. So it's nice to see them flourishing like this.
You can tell they really care about that era of comics, to transpose that stuff and put it into here and to summarize it in a way to get other people to enjoy it almost as much as they do. Because like now I'm invested in Jenny Crisis, right? Like just her whole vibe is something I relate to, of being someone with anxiety myself and having to learn how to control that. And yes, you're supposed to feel your feelings, but you can't run from them. But you also have to know you can't fully control them, and you have to feel them and be in the moment.
Yeah, it's doing that storytelling thing that you can do with fiction, is you take the literal and you multiply it because it's a fictional story. So you take what regular anxiety is and you literally have it affect everything in the world to make it feel like you can't feel it. Because when you feel like you're having anxiety, it feels like it's the end of the world. It feels like you have no control, and it feels like everything's falling apart. So it's just making that more literal by having her feelings actually affect the world at large. So it's an interesting concept for that reason.
Right. So, and so, again, kudos to them. And it makes me want to go back and check out Planetary. Like I said at the beginning of our show, like way back, I want to go and check this out now because I need to, like, if the Planetary book itself was doing these kind of themes with superheroes and myths and legends that this book is done kind of through 4 issues, that's right up my alley, because I am really enjoying this especially for something that we thought was going to be like Batman and the Outsiders adjacent, right? Like we didn't realize Drummer was going to be a third character in this when it was announced. For it to turn into this thing that can kind of comment on society and comics as a whole, I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Yeah. All right. What are you giving Outsiders issue 4?
I'm giving this 8.5.
You know what? I'm tempted to agree with that actually.
Ooh.
Yeah. I think it was good. Really good.